Hello everybody, this is Kate at the Library of Whispers. Now I had a request to do some more soft spoken reading, which is something that I haven't done for a while. So I thought we'd have a look at some ghostly writing from a long time ago. So this book is Haunted Homes and Family Legends of Great Britain. There we go. It's a lovely old book. Let's open it up. Also has some nice illustrations. Now, it was published in 1905. It was written by John H. Ingram. So I think what we'll do is we'll just delve in. Just pick something at random. Pages are very delicate. This is quite old. So let's have a look at some of these stories from London. Let's start with London, St. James's Palace. In a small collection of more or less known accounts of apparitions, edited by T. M. Jarvis, and published in 1823 under the title of Accredited Ghost Stories, is one which describes the appearance of the Duchess of Mazarin after her death to Madame de Beauclaire. The name of the authority for this story is not given, but Mr. Jarvis declares that he solemnly protested his conviction of the truth of it, and that several other persons of undoubted credit, alive when the narrative was published, were also satisfied as to its being a relation of fact. The Duchess of Mazarin, need it be premised, was mistress to Charles II, whilst Madame de Beauclaire held a similar position towards his brother and successor, James II. These two women are said to have been greatly attached to each other, a somewhat singular circumstance when their positions are taken into consideration. After the burning of Whitehall, these favourites of royalty were removed to St. James's Palace, where they were allotted very handsome suites of apartments. But, says our author, the face of public affairs being then wholly changed, and a new set of courtiers as well as rules of behaviour came into vogue, they conversed almost wholly with each other. The truth would appear to be that these women, being neglected on account of new favourites, had a fellow feeling for each other, and, as is not unusual in such cases, began to discuss matters of a graver nature than had been their custom hitherto. In one of the more serious consultations which these ci devant favourites held together on the immortality of the soul, they discussed the doctrine of apparitions, and made a solemn stipulation that whichever one died first, she should return, if there was a possibility of so doing, and give the other an account of what position she was in the next life. This promise, says the account, was often repeated, and the Duchess happening to fall sick, and her life despaired of all about her, Madame de Beauclaire reminded her of her solemn promise, to which her Grace responded that she might depend upon her performances of it. These words passed between them not above an hour before the dissolution of the Duchess, and were spoken before several persons who were in the room, although they did not comprehend the meaning of what they heard. Some years after the Duchess's decease happening, says our author, in a visit I made to Madame de Beauclaire, to fall on the topic of futurity, she expressed her disbelief of it with a great deal of warmth, which a little surprised me, as being of a quite contrary way of thinking myself, and had always, by the religion she professed, supposed her highly so. In answer to her interlocutor's arguments, the lady related her compact with her departed friend, and in spite of all he could urge, deemed the non-appearance of her friend's apparition was a proof of this non-existence of a future state. Some months after this conversation, its narrator states that he was visiting at an acquaintance of Madame de Beauclaire. We were just sat down to cards about 9 o'clock in the evening, as near as I can remember, is his record, when a servant came hastily into the room and acquainted the lady I was with that Madame de Beauclaire had sent to entreat she would come that moment to her, adding that if she desired ever to see her more in this world, she must not delay her visit. The lady, having a severe cold, and hearing that Madame de Beauclaire was apparently in good health, declined to accede to this request, but on receiving a second, still more urgent message, accompanied by a bequest of a casket containing the watch, chain, necklace, and other trinkets of Madame de Beauclaire, hastened to that lady's apartments, accompanied by our narrator. On arrival at Madame's, he sent up his name, and was requested to come up with his companion at once. Upon entering the room where Madame de Beauclaire was, she informed him, after a few introductory words, that she would very soon pass from this world into that eternity which she once doubted, but was now assured of. She then proceeded to declare that she had seen the Duchess of Mazarin. I perceived not how she entered, was her statement, but turning my eyes towards yonder corner of the room, I saw her stand in the same form and habit she was accustomed to appear in when living. Fain would I have spoken, but had not the power of utterance. She took a little circuit round the chamber, seeming rather to swim than walk, then stopped by the side of that Indian chest, and looking on me with her usual sweetness, said, "Beauclaire, between the hours of 12 and 1 this night you will be with me." The surprise I was in at first being a little abated, I began to ask some questions concerning that future world I was so soon to visit, but on the opening of my lips for that purpose, she vanished from my sight. It was now nearly 12, and Madame de Beauclaire not appearing to be suffering from any ailment, they endeavoured to revive her spirits. But, says the narrator, we scarce began to speak, when suddenly her countenance changed, and she cried out, "Oh, I am sick at heart." Mrs. Wood applied some restoratives, but to no effect. She grew still worse, and in about half an hour expired, it being exactly the time the apparition had foretold. London, St. James's Street. It is a curious circumstance that more buildings have a reputation for being haunted or discoverable in towns and cities than in sparsely populated places. The British metropolis, despite its gas lamps and guardian police, contains many residences that even now are left to the mercies of those spectral tenants who alone inhabit them. It must be confessed, however, that instead of increasing the number of these disturbed residences, for reasons obvious to all, is rapidly decreasing. It is not many years since a house in St. James's Street, the number of which it is as well to omit, acquired considerable notoriety on account of the unpleasant noises which took place in it. It had stood empty for a long time, in consequence of the annoyances to which the various tenants who had tried it had been subjected. There was one apartment in particular which nobody was able to occupy without being disturbed. On one occasion, a youth who, having been abroad for a considerable time, had not any knowledge of the evil reputation this chamber had acquired, was put there to sleep on his arrival, as it was hoped his rest might not be disturbed. In the morning, however, he complained sadly of the terrible time he had had in the night, with people looking in at him between the curtains of his bed, and he avowed his determination to terminate his visit at once, as he could not possibly sleep there any more. After this period, the house was again vacant for a considerable time, but was at length taken, and workmen were sent in to put it in habitable repair. One day, when the men were away at their dinner, says our informant, the master builder took the key with him and went to inspect progress, and having examined the lower rooms, he was ascending the stairs when he heard a man's foot behind him. He looked round, but there was nobody there, and he moved on again. Still, there was somebody following, and he stopped and looked over the rails, but there was no one to be seen. So, though feeling rather queer, he advanced into the drawing-room, where a fire had been lighted, and wishing to combat the uncomfortable sensation that was creeping over him, he took hold of a chair, and drawing it resolutely along the floor, he slammed it down upon the hearth with some force, and seated himself in it, when, to his amazement, the action in all its particulars of sound was immediately repeated by his unseen companion, who seemed to seat himself beside him on a chair, as invisible as himself. Horror-stricken, the worthy builder started up and rushed out of the house. London, the Tower. There is no place in the kingdom one would deem more likely to be haunted than that strange conglomeration of rooms, castles and dungeons known as the Tower of London. For many centuries it has been the scene of numberless deaths by violence, some by public execution and others by private murder, till it is scarcely metaphorical language to declare that its walls have been built out of human bones and cemented by human blood. That ghosts and spectres have haunted its weird precincts, no believer in the supernatural can doubt, and if we may credit all that has been told of it of late years, its apparitions are not yet quite beings of the past. In Notes and Queries for 1860, the late Edmund Lenthal Swift, Keeper of the Crown Jewels, published a remarkable account of a spectral illusion witnessed by himself in the time-honoured fortress, and his account, together with such additions and explanations as a subsequent correspondence invoked, shall now be presented to the reader. I have often purposed to leave behind me a faithful record of all that I personally know of this strange story, writes Mr. Swift, in response to an inquiry as to particulars of the ghost in the Tower of London. 43 years have passed, and its impression is as vividly before me as on the moment of its occurrence. But there are yet survivors who can testify. But I have not at any time either amplified or abridged my ghostly experiences. In 1814, I was appointed Keeper of the Crown Jewels in the Tower, where I resided with my family till my retirement in 1852. One Saturday night in October 1817, about the witching hour, I was at supper with my wife, her sister, and our little boy in the sitting room of the jewel house, which, then comparatively modernised, is said to have been the doleful prison of Anne Boleyn, and of the 10 bishops whom Oliver Cromwell piously accommodated therein. The room was, as it still is, irregularly shaped, having 3 doors and 2 windows, which last are cut nearly 9 feet deep into the outer wall. Between these is a chimney piece projecting far into the room, and then surmounted with a large oil painting. On the night in question, the doors were all closed. Heavy and dark cloth curtains were let down over the windows, and the only light in the room was that of 2 candles on the table. I sat at the foot of the table, my son on my right hand, his mother fronting the chimney piece, and her sister on the opposite side. I had offered a glass of wine and water to my wife when, on putting it to her lips, she paused and exclaimed, "Good God, what is that?" I looked up and saw a cylindrical figure like a glass tube, seemingly about the thickness of my arm, and hovering between the ceiling and the table. Its contents appeared to be a dense fluid, white and pale azure, like to the gathering of a summer cloud, and incessantly mingling with the cylinder. This lasted about 2 minutes, when it began slowly to move before my sister-in-law, then, following the oblong shape of the table, before my son and myself, passing behind my wife. It paused for a moment over her right shoulder. Observe, there was no mirror opposite to her in which she could have there beheld it. Instantly, she crouched down, and with both hands covering her shoulder, she shrieked out, "Oh, Christ, it has seized me!" Even now, while writing, I feel the fresh horror of that moment. I caught up my chair, struck at the wainscot behind her, rushed upstairs to the other children's room, and told the terrified nurse what I had seen. Meanwhile, the other domestics had hurried into the parlour, where their mistress recounted to them the scene, even as I was detailing it above stairs. The marvel, adds Mr. Swift, of all this is enhanced by the fact that neither my sister-in-law nor my son beheld this appearance. When I, the next morning, related the night's horror to our chaplain after the service in the Tower Church, he asked me, might not one person have his natural senses deceived, and if one, why might not two? My answer was, if two, why not 2,000? An argument which would reduce history, secular or sacred, to a fable. Our chaplain, remarked Mr. Swift, is a subsequent communication to Notes and Queries, suggested the possibilities of some foolery having been intromitted at my windows, and proposed the visit of a scientific friend who minutely inspected the parlour and made the closest investigation, but could not in any way solve the mystery. In reply to further communications later on, the jewel keeper stated that his wife did not perceive any form in the cylindrical tube, but only the cloud or vapour which both of them at once described. Her health was not affected, but was her life terminated, as had been suggested by the apparition which both had seen, nor could it have been, as Mr. Swift pertinently pointed out, a fog or vapour that seized his wife by the shoulder. Finally, replying to the suggestion of phantasmagoric agency, Mr. Swift not only made it clear that no optical action from outside could have produced any manifestation within, through the thick curtains, but also that the most skilful operator could not produce an appearance visible to only half the persons present, and that could bodily lay hold of one individual among them. The mystery remains unsolved. A more tragical incident, following hard on the visitation to his own habitation, is thus alluded to by Mr. Swift. And although the tale has been told by many, and in many different ways, as he was so closely connected with it, it is but just that the keeper's version should be the one accepted. One of the night sentries of the jewel office records our authority, was alarmed by a figure like a huge bear issuing from underneath the jewel room door, as ghostly a door as ever was opened to or closed on a doomed man. He thrust at it with his bayonet, which stuck in the door, even as my chair dinted. The wainscot. He dropped in a fit and was carried senseless to the guard-room. When on the morrow I saw the unfortunate soldier in the main guard-room, continues Mr. Swift, his fellow sentinel was also there and testified to having seen him on his post just before the alarm, awakened alert and even spoken to him. Moreover, I then heard the poor man tell his own story. I saw him once again on the following day, but changed beyond my recognition. In another day or two, the brave and steady soldier who would have mounted a breach or led a forlorn hope with unshaken nerves died at the presence of a shadow. Mr. George Offer, referring to this tragedy, speaks of strange noises having also been heard when the figure resembling a bear was seen by the doomed soldier. Right, let's see if we can see some more. Let's go back a little bit. Holland House. The history of Holland House, by the Princess Mary Liechtenstein, the adopted daughter of the present Lady Holland, is a well-known popular account of one of the most interesting London residences extant. The many highly gifted men and beautiful women who have frequented Holland House for several generations past have endowed it with memories of a most attractive nature. But the Princess Marie's work tells us that reminiscences of a far less pleasing character hover about the old house, and indeed that, like most respectable dwellings of any antiquity, Holland House is haunted. At least 2 ghostly legends, according to the fair authoress, are connected with it. An ancient manor house belonging to Sir William Cope, it is believed, formerly stood where Holland House now stands, and so it would seem was incorporated in the present mansion. Sir William Cope's daughter and heiress, Isabel, was married to Sir Henry Rich, created Baron Kensington in 1622 and sent to Spain by James I to assist in negotiating a marriage between Prince Charles and the Infanta. In 1624 he was created Earl of Holland, and it was this same nobleman, as the princess tells us, who added to the building its wings and arcades, and more than this, he employed the best artists of the time in decorating the interior. Clarendon describes the Earl as a very handsome man, of a lovely and winning presence and gentle conversation. He played, says the historian, a conspicuous part during the reign of Charles I and the commencement of the struggle with the Parliament. After having stood in high favour with Queen Henrietta, he fell under suspicion of disloyalty, which was confirmed by his lending Holland House for a meeting between Fairfax and certain discontented members of Parliament. The year following, having rejoined the Royalists, he was taken in arms at St. Neots, and, having been imprisoned in Warwick Castle, he was condemned to death and beheaded in March 1648-9 in Palace Yard. Warburton, in a note to Clarendon's history, says, "He lived like a knave and died like a fool. He appeared on the scaffold dressed in a white satin waistcoat and a white satin cap with silver lace. After some divine conference with a clergyman and an affectionate leave-taking with a friend, he turned to the executioner and said, 'Here, my friend, let my clothes and my body alone. There is £10 for thee. That is better than my clothes, I am sure of it. And when you take up my head, do not take off my cap.' He appears, however, even by Warburton's account, to have died with much firmness, and his head was severed by one blow from his body. This Lord Holland, the first of his name, and the chief builder of Holland House, is, the Princess Liechtenstein tells us, believed to yet haunt one room of the splendid old mansion. The gilt room is said to be tenanted by the solitary ghost of its first lord, who, according to tradition, issues forth at midnight from behind a secret door and walks slowly through the scenes of former triumphs with his head in his hand. To add to this mystery, there is a tale of 3 spots of blood on one side of the recess whence he issues, 3 spots which can never be effaced. In the grounds of Holland House is the Green Lane, formerly called Nightingale Lane, as long as nightingales frequented it. It is, says the princess, a long avenue like an immense gallery, arched with trees and carpeted with grass, the distant light at the end softening down into that misty blue so peculiar to dear England. This avenue is the scene of a spiritual experience chronicled by Aubrey in his Miscellanies, and which is as follows. The beautiful Lady Diana Rich, daughter to the Earl of Holland, as she was walking in her father's garden at Kensington to take the air before dinner, about 11 o'clock, being then very well, met her own apparition, habit and everything as in a looking-glass, about a month after she died of smallpox, and 'tis said that her sister, the Lady Isabella Thynne, saw the like of herself also before she died. This account I had from a person of honour. A third sister, Mary, was married to the Earl of Breadalbane, we are informed. It has been recorded that she also, not long after her marriage, had some such warning of her approaching dissolution, and so the old tradition has remained, and who would wish it removed? Belonging to past times, it should be respected, but whether we respect tradition or not, it is a received fact that, whenever the mistress of Holland House meets herself, death is hovering about her. So we shall leave it there. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers. I shall see you very soon. Bye bye for now. Bye bye.